You're not going to believe this, but I am standing in my lawyer's office right now, and the paperwork is literally on the desk for a lawsuit that is going to absolutely ruin my brother's life. He thinks he's so smart, so slick, but he just made the biggest mistake of his life using my inheritance to buy a house that he planned to fill with his new wife and, get this, his monstrous mother-in-law, all while I was overseas serving my country. I'm talking about over $300,000.
Gone. Used.
And he thought I would just take it. He thought I'd be happy for him. Was I wrong to wait until the closing day, after his entire family had moved in, to hit him with the legal papers that will make them all instantly homeless? Tell me, honestly, if you would have done the same exact thing. I need to start this story from the very beginning, and that means starting with my brother, Mark. Mark and I have always been close, or at least I thought we were. We were only 3 years apart, and when our parents passed away 5 years ago in a sudden, tragic accident, we were all each other had left. The will was clear. Everything was to be split equally. For me, that meant just over $350,000. It wasn't get-rich money, but it was enough for a fantastic down payment on a home or a solid investment portfolio, which was exactly what I planned to do. At the time, I was already enlisted in the Army and was about to ship out for a 2-year deployment overseas. This deployment was a huge career move, a serious boost to my rank and pay, but it also meant I couldn't manage my finances as easily. I asked Mark, my own brother, my only remaining family, for a favor. I asked him to hold on to the money for me. I set up a separate bank account, put him on as a co-signer, not as a joint owner. There's a difference. My lawyer later made sure I understood that, so he could, theoretically, pay bills or handle emergencies if I was in a communication black hole, which was highly likely. I made him swear on our parents' grave that he wouldn't touch it. He looked me straight in the eye, gave me the "I'm your brother, I got you" speech, and I left for the Middle East with a clear conscience, thinking my money was safe. Life overseas was intense. Long hours, dangerous work, and very little downtime.
Communication was spotty at best.
I was truly relying on Mark to be my connection to home. We'd send emails occasionally, maybe a voice message if the connection was good enough. Mark was always very vague about his own life. He had met a woman named Sarah just a few months before I left. She seemed nice enough in the few times I met her, maybe a little pushy, but nothing that set off alarm bells. Mark was clearly smitten. While I was deployed, I got an email saying they had gotten engaged, which was fast, but I was happy for him. A few months later, they had a small, private wedding, which I had to miss, of course. I remember being a bit sad, but again, I was focused on my mission. Mark would occasionally send me photos of him and Sarah looking happy, and he mentioned he was looking for a new job, but he never talked about the money. Not once. I didn't worry, because, well, he was Mark. He was my brother. As my 2-year deployment was finally drawing to a close, I started making plans for my return. The first thing I wanted to do was get my own place. I emailed Mark and asked him to start looking at townhouses or condos in the area we grew up in. I told him I wanted to take about $100,000 out for a down payment and invest the rest. His reply was short and weirdly non-committal. He just said, "Hold tight. We'll talk when you're back." Alarm bells went off, but I reasoned he was just busy. Then, a few weeks before I was set to return, I got an email that was pure confetti and celebration from Mark. The subject line was big news. We did it. I opened it, and my stomach dropped. The entire email was a gushing announcement about how he and Sarah had just bought their dream home. A 4-bedroom, brand new construction in a very expensive, upscale suburban area about an hour from where we grew up. Attached were photos of a huge house with a 2-car garage. They looked ecstatic. And then I saw the number in the purchase agreement he had inadvertently attached to one of the photos, the final sale price. My blood went cold. The house cost $325,000. That was almost the exact total amount of my inheritance. I couldn't call him right away because of the time difference and my operational schedule, but I checked the bank account the first chance I got, using the online access I still had. The balance was $17,000. $17,000 out of $350,000. My money was gone. I sat there in the sweltering heat of my barracks, staring at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest so hard I thought it would burst through my ribs. 2 years of service, 2 years of sacrificing everything, 2 years of trusting my brother, and he had wiped out my future. He had used my parents' final gift to me to buy a life for himself and his new wife. When I finally was able to call him, I didn't even yell. My voice was a shaky whisper. "Mark," I said, "where is the money?" He fumbled for words, which was Mark's tell for a lie. He tried to brush it off, saying, "Oh, about that.
It was just a loan, man.
A temporary thing. I'll pay you back. Sarah and I just needed a leg up and you weren't using it. It's a great investment, a house, you know? And hey, you've always got a place to stay here." A temporary loan? He had put my entire inheritance, every single cent that my parents had intended for me, into a house that was now in his and his wife's names, and he had the audacity to call it a loan? And a place to stay? What he meant was, "You can sleep on the couch in the home I bought with your money." I hung up on him. I didn't say another word. I immediately found a military legal aid contact and got in touch with a civilian lawyer back home. The first thing my lawyer, a sharp woman named Ms. Chun, told me was that he had committed fraud and a breach of fiduciary duty. Because I hadn't made him a joint owner, but a co-signer with specific instructions, the money was still legally mine, and his use of it to purchase an asset for himself constituted theft. The fact that the purchase amount was so close to my account balance made the intent crystal clear. This is where the story gets really twisted. Sarah's mother, Brenda, the mother-in-law from the title, was apparently a huge part of this. Sarah was insistent that her mother, who was recently widowed and down on her luck, move in with them. Mark told me this later in a rambling, self-pitying email where he tried to justify everything. Sarah basically convinced him that their modest apartment wasn't suitable for a multi-generational home and that Brenda deserved to live in luxury after everything she'd been through. Mark, wanting to be the hero for his new bride, agreed to use my money to buy the bigger, more expensive house. So, the $325,000 wasn't just for Mark and Sarah. It was, in large part, to provide a lavish home for his brand new mother-in-law, a woman I had never met. The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of this plan, to steal from his brother, a soldier deployed overseas, to impress his wife and house his new mother-in-law, fueled a cold, hard rage in me. I was done being the good guy. I was done trusting him. I was done. I came back stateside a few weeks later. Mark met me at the airport, all smiles and handshakes, trying to act like everything was normal. He kept babbling about the new house, how great the kitchen was, and how I was going to love my guest room. I played along. I nodded. I smiled, and I kept every single detail of my legal plan a complete secret. I moved into a furnished rental apartment for a month, telling Mark I needed time to adjust before settling in. He bought it hook, line, and sinker. I spent that month working with Ms. Chun. We filed the initial paperwork for a constructive trust, which is a legal remedy that essentially declares that the house, because it was purchased with stolen funds, is not truly Mark's property, but is being held in trust for me. It's a complicated legal maneuver, but in simple terms, it meant I was claiming the house as my own, or at least demanding the full value of the house from him, which he couldn't possibly pay. Mark and Sarah moved into the house, their dream home, about 3 weeks after I got back. They had a big, ridiculous moving day, complete with a professional moving company and a huge celebratory dinner. Sarah's mother, Brenda, moved in the next day. Mark was sending me photos, oblivious to the storm I was brewing. He sent one of Brenda sitting on a brand new, expensive-looking sofa in the living room, a smug look on her face, and I felt nothing but ice in my veins. They were enjoying my money, my future, while I was planning how to dismantle their entire new life. The cruelty of it was delicious. I wanted them to feel the full impact of their betrayal. So that's the situation I was in. My parents' money, my security, my future, was sitting in a house owned by my lying brother, his selfish wife, and his entitled mother-in-law. They were settled, they were comfortable, and they thought they had won. They thought they had gotten away with it, that I would just accept a loan and wait for a repayment that would never come. I had the legal firepower to stop them, to take the house or force the sale, but I hadn't pulled the trigger yet. I was watching them build their life on my foundation, and I knew I had the power to collapse it all with the stroke of a pen. Before I tell you what happened next, the day I serve the papers, I want you to pause right now and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have gone for the quick win, or would you have waited for the most devastating moment to strike? Tell me your honest revenge plan. My lawyer, Miss Chun, had suggested we serve the papers immediately, but I told her no. I wanted the maximum psychological impact. I wanted them to unpack every box, buy every piece of furniture, and settle into their routine before I pulled the rug out. I waited exactly 1 month after they moved in. This was enough time for them to host a housewarming party, for Brenda to start decorating her own dedicated suite, and for Mark to feel completely secure and happy in his stolen castle. The day I chose was a Tuesday. I knew Mark and Sarah were both working, but Brenda was usually home, and I wanted her to be the first to witness the chaos. I drove over to the new house, the one that looked so perfect and pristine. It was a beautiful, 2-story home, the kind of place you see on TV. I parked down the street. Miss Chen's process server was already waiting in an unmarked car. I walked up the driveway, and for a split second, I felt a flicker of pain, thinking about how my life could have been if I had trusted someone else. But that feeling was immediately crushed by the memory of Mark's lying eyes at the airport. I rang the doorbell. Brenda answered, wearing a silk robe and holding a huge coffee mug. She gave me a brittle, fake polite smile. "Oh, Mark's brother, the soldier. Come in, come in. Isn't this house just divine? Mark is such a provider." "It is a nice house, Brenda," I said, my voice completely flat. "A very nice house. And speaking of providing," just as I finished that sentence, the process server, a tall, professional-looking man, walked up the path and stood right behind me. He handed me a huge, thick envelope, and I handed it straight to Brenda. "Brenda," I said, looking her dead in the eye, "this house was purchased with $325,000 of my money. It was my inheritance from my parents, and my brother stole it." Brenda's face went from smug to pure, unadulterated shock. She fumbled with the envelope, trying to read the first page of the summons. What is this? Some kind of joke?" "No joke, Brenda," I said, a smile finally cracking on my face, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was a victorious, dark one. "That is a summons for Mark and Sarah. It's an emergency filing for a constructive trust and a preliminary injunction to prevent them from selling or taking out any loans against this property. What that thick paper you're holding means, Brenda, is that as of this moment, you are living in a house that is the subject of a massive fraud lawsuit, and I am demanding that the court either give me the house or force an immediate sale to pay me back. You are, effectively, living in a house that doesn't belong to them, and one that they will most likely lose." Brenda started hyperventilating. She dropped the papers on the floor and began screaming. I calmly stepped around her and walked back to my car, leaving her in the doorway, shrieking my name. She was calling Mark. I could hear her through the closed door, screaming about the papers and the lawsuit. I drove away, my hands gripping the steering wheel, and for the first time in 2 years, I felt a sense of control, a sense of justice. The aftermath was exactly as devastating as I had hoped. Mark called me 10 minutes later, absolutely hysterical. He was pleading, crying, threatening, all in the same breath. He told me I was ruining his life, that I was no brother of his, and that I was making his wife and mother-in-law homeless. That last part made me laugh out loud. "No, Mark," I told him, cutting him off. "You made your wife and mother-in-law homeless when you stole $325,000 from your brother and put it into a house that wasn't legally yours. You built your life on a lie, and now it's collapsing. The consequence of theft is loss. Enjoy the consequences." I hung up and blocked his number. The legal battle was surprisingly quick, thanks to the overwhelming evidence Ms. Chun and I had. The bank records clearly showed the transfer of the money to the title company on the exact day of the closing. Mark couldn't argue that it was a loan because there was no loan agreement, no promissory note, and no repayment schedule. The account was legally my property, and he had violated his fiduciary duty as a co-signer. Within 3 months, a judge issued a ruling. Mark and Sarah were ordered to pay me the full $325,000 plus legal fees and interest within 90 days. Since they had no savings and Mark was only making a modest salary, the only way to satisfy the judgment was to sell the house. The court appointed a receiver to oversee the sale to ensure I got my money. Mark, Sarah, and Brenda had to move out. They fought it every step of the way, trying to delay, trying to appeal, but the law was on my side. I heard through an old mutual friend that they ended up moving into a tiny 2-bedroom apartment. Brenda blamed Sarah, Sarah blamed Mark, and Mark blamed me, but it was all his fault. My revenge was complete. I got my money back, every single penny, and Mark lost the house, his wife's respect, and his brother forever. He gambled my future to give his new family a fantasy life, and he lost everything. The money is now safely invested, and I'm looking at houses again, a real house, bought with my own honest funds. What I took from this entire ordeal is that sometimes the most painful truth for someone is the moment they have to face the real-world consequences of their selfish actions. Mark's betrayal cut me deeper than anything I experienced overseas. But standing up for myself and hitting him with the maximum legal penalty was the only way to preserve my future and my self-respect. Like this video, if you were 100% on my side and think my brother got exactly what he deserved. Subscribe for more stories of betrayal and justice, and share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section below. I want to know if my cold-blooded revenge was justified. I'll see you all in the next story.